this point in leadership where it isn't about doing more, it's about doing something very different. The issue isn't effort, it's position. If you can't see the big picture, you're not going to be able to lead through the mission. And it's the idea that leaders, they are the ones that are deciding what matters. Mm-hmm. Just because you're checking boxes doesn't mean that you're driving the outcomes. And that's what you need to be doing, is driving outcomes. Busyness has a sense of hiding the lack of prioritization.
The point is, we don't often get pulled into the weeds. We act like we don't have any control over that.
Right.
But really what's happening is we're stepping into the weeds.
It will start to erode some trust. It starts to create confusion about roles. And every time that leader takes work back, it prevents that growth. Leadership isn't tested when things are calm. And we know that. It's always tested when everything is competing for that leader's attention at the same time. You're listening to the Elevate Your Call to Service podcast.
Here, law enforcement leaders gain practical tools to lead proactively in a reactive profession so they can communicate clearly, strengthen internal trust, and stay grounded in their call to serve.
I'm Mike McIntosh, a retired sheriff and current division chief with nearly 4 decades in law enforcement leadership.
And I'm Kathy McIntosh, a business and branding strategist and longtime law enforcement wife. I focus on the human side of leadership, communication, identity, and the internal dynamics that impact performance and trust across an organization.
Together, we combine real-world command experience with clear, actionable leadership conversations.
So you can lead with intention, build stronger teams, and elevate your call to service. Welcome back to Elevate Your Call to Service. Today we're going to talk about something that impacts every leader, whether or not you realize it in the moment or not. It's the tension between being in the work and actually leading it. Because at some point, every single leadership career, something shifts in it. The skills that made you successful early on, like the ability to jump in and handle multiple tasks and be the guy, the go-to person, those are the same skills that can start to hold you back as a leader.
Yeah, there really comes this point in leadership where it isn't about doing more, it's about doing something very different. It's about stepping out of the weeds, and for some of that becomes difficult, and really it's a process.
Mm-hmm.
But if you stay in the weeds, you're going to lose the ability to see that big picture. And if you can see the big picture, then you know that you can lead the mission. But if you can't see the big picture, you're not going to be able to lead through the mission. The issue isn't effort, it's position. And as leaders, we have to understand that we're most valuable when we step into our actual role and get out of the weeds. Sometimes that's the hardest part about leadership, is stepping back from the work so that those that are in that role can do their jobs.
We're really talking about leading above the noise. That's the phrasing that we're most comfortable with. It's not just prioritization. It's a shift in how you see your exact role as a leader. It's about, as you said, stepping out of the weeds, getting out of the day-to-day details, and letting go of being the one who does everything. You've been the go-to person for such a long time, and then finally you're elevated to a position where you have to start backing off and taking a more hands-off approach. It's about not just seeing the big picture, but owning the big picture and putting full trust in your team to do what they're capable and skilled and selected to do. So what we're hoping to share with our listeners during this podcast episode is to know how to cut through the noise and step into your role more clearly, to have a better understanding about how the strongest leaders make their decisions under pressure, and give a practical approach to help you focus on the next right thing without being overwhelmed, without confusion, and without overwhelming and confusing your team as well. Because when leaders get this right, teams start to grow faster, decisions get cleaner, neater,
Yeah.
stress really starts to calm, and overall service improves. And I know that you have lived through these moments and these situations. Um, can you tell us about a time when you realized that leading above the noise really was a critical leadership step?
When I reflect back to that question, I go back to that distinct role between a sergeant and a commander, because I think that that's where it becomes most evident in your leadership journey. If we're talking about law enforcement, as a sergeant, you're on the team, you're in the team, and really, for the most part, you are in the weeds with your deputies. You need to be, because the decisions that you make, you have to have that information. You have to get into the weeds so that you're making the correct decision. The hardest shift in leadership from a law enforcement perspective is when you go from that sergeant role to that lieutenant or that commander role, whatever that next step is. Because what they're really asking you to do is get out of the weeds and now come at the problem, look at the problem with a much wider gaze, bring the resources into the problem that you need to bring in to come to a solution that is best for what's going on. And that was something that was difficult for me to do. Like you said, as a sergeant, I was the go-to person. We had a great, strong, solid team. We're accomplishing the things that we need to accomplish. And the skill set and the things that I did that got me to the position of being a good sergeant, great sergeant, whatever your role was, is the reason why you test for that next position, and probably the reason why you got that next position. But that's not the role that you're going to fulfill. And the natural fallback is to approach that role the same that you had as a sergeant. And so making that shift, that's when you really start to realize, I need to do things differently. I need to see things differently. I need to get out of the weeds. I need to back off. I need to focus on everything that surrounds the team. And that's when I first realized that leaders don't prove their value by doing more. They prove their value by focusing on the team.
I think back to all the movies that we see where maybe it's a military movie and there's somebody with a huge map laid out in front of them, and they're positioning almost like toy soldiers and where they're going to go and where the next battle is. And this is, I know we don't have a battle mentality, but it's the difference between being on, boots on the ground as to being the guy who can see that whole map, the whole big picture,
Right.
to know where different teams are stationed, where the objective is, what the objective is. When you step into that higher role, that's the hat that you start to put on. And so you have to come out of all of the nitty-gritty, step-by-step tasks and start to look at outcome and performance and, as you said, big picture, because leadership is not about handling everything. It's about knowing what needs the most attention right now so that the entire objective, that entire mission can be fulfilled.
Right. And as that leader, we want to make that transition. And we're calling this concept leading above the noise.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the idea that leaders, they're not just managing tasks, they are the ones that are deciding what matters, what we need to focus on most, so that the teams can do what they need to do. They focus, they execute, and they serve effectively. You really, in policing, leaders don't fail because there's too much to do. They fail because they try to do everything at once. And we know that in leadership, in law enforcement, there's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of things that are coming at that leader. And strong leaders, they're going to cut through the noise. They're going to focus on what matters most, and they're going to execute so that their teams can serve effectively.
So you've just given a pretty good picture of what leading above the noise really means. But break it down just one more step and help us understand.
Sure. When I look at leading above the noise, to me, it's prioritization in our service. What is the next best thing that we need to be doing? It's deciding what gets attention, and it's realizing that not everything is equal. And what I mean by that is there are some things that are more important to do now than others, and that's okay. But many times you see all of this coming, and you try to make sure that everything gets equalized, and it's not. You just can't lead that way. This focus will enable execution, and through that execution, our service is going to improve through the clarity of action.
Why is it such a defining leadership skill?
Because you always have these constant competing demands. And most of us have limited resources. A lot of times, these are high-stake decisions that you're making. And this impact, we understand that the impact of our decision really affects safety and outcomes.
So this is a characteristic that can separate the great leaders from the mediocre leaders.
Absolutely.
So what's the difference between being busy and being effective as a leader?
This is such a great question. And I think that it's a difficult question because a lot of times when you look at a leader from the outside, you think that busyness equals effectiveness, and that's not necessarily the case. And that's what we mean about cutting out the noise, that just because you're busy doesn't mean that you're effective. Just because you're checking boxes doesn't mean that you're driving the outcomes. And that's what you need to be doing, is driving outcomes. You need to be effective. Your decisions need to be effective. That effectiveness requires focus. And busyness has a sense of hiding the lack of prioritization.
It's something that I ran into recently in my own business, and it applies directly to leadership. I was in the middle of preparing for a marketing launch, something that I am uniquely positioned to lead and that drives the direction of my business. And right and smack in the middle of that, a client came in, a good big client, and they came in with a pretty substantial need for a large website update. And the reality is, I am the best person on the team to handle the marketing strategy. And I also have team members who are fully capable of handling the website updates. The right leadership decision would have been to delegate that work. But instead, I jumped in, and it was in my heart because I really wanted to make sure the client was cared for and things were done right. So I started reviewing everything. I started making adjustments, getting involved in the details because I wanted to make sure everything was A+ effort, which my team would have done anyway without me. And I realized after the fact that by coming out of my lane and starting to get into areas where I didn't need to be, I created extra stress for my team. I tightened deadlines. I put too much work into too short of a time, and I inserted myself where I did not need to be. And in trying to do everything, I made things harder for everyone, not just myself. I think, made it harder for our client because they didn't know exactly who they were supposed to be going to all of a sudden.
Right.
So it's messy. It gets really messy because I jumped from that leadership position back into the weeds.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many times I've done that. I can't tell you how many times I've seen other leaders do that. Usually the heart is pure in that.
Mhm.
They're doing that because they want to help. They want to help get a jump on it. They want to help one of the team members be able to, kind of come into that, and you've already got some of it done. The problem with that is it starts to diminish some of that trust.
Mhm.
Some of the team members are going to think, well, I don't know why they just didn't hand it to me. That's my role here. And I know that as leaders, we feel pulled towards solving this immediately, jumping on top of it, especially when we're talking about a big client or something that this may have come even from our boss, and we want to be able to get this done well, quickly, and efficiently. But in that urgency starts to create that emotional decision making, and we want to avoid emotional decision making at all cost. And we also know that the loudest issue often steals the attention.
For sure.
And what we have to remember in all of this is just because a situation is urgent, it doesn't mean it's where you, as the leader, need to focus your attention. We need to make sure that we're not leading with emotion, but rather with emotional intelligence, and making sure that we're moving that to the right person.
Let me ask you something. When your teams talk about your leadership, what do you hope they say? Trust isn't automatic. Respect isn't inherited with rank. Both are built intentionally. Many sergeants and lieutenants are carrying more responsibility than they were ever formally prepared for. And many are wondering whether they're truly ready for the next step. Coaching creates space to slow down, reflect, and lead on purpose. We've seen leaders restore unity in divided teams. We've seen aspiring leaders step into promotions with steady confidence. If that's the kind of intentional growth that matters to you, go to leleaders.com and schedule a conversation. We'll meet you where you are, and we'll build a plan that fits your role and your goals.
It's funny when you say that because I don't feel like it was an emotional decision. It was deep down. But if I'm honest with myself, I migrated to what was more comfortable doing. When you're working on a marketing effort, there's a ton of stuff that's unknown. You're just sometimes throwing spaghetti against the wall, seeing what's going to stick. And there's really no proven outcome. You think you're doing the right thing, but you never know until it's over what you're doing. And so I wanted to step out of that unknown and step into something that I could control. It was almost a procrastination technique for myself.
Yeah.
Like, oh, let me do this instead because this is really urgent. And I defaulted to, what my strengths used to be when I was the one doing all the work. And those familiar tasks felt more productive to me than working on something that had an unknown outcome. They weren't necessarily the highest value. They certainly weren't the most effective way to build up my team. And I wasn't choosing what was most important. I was choosing what felt the most controllable.
Yeah. I see that on a consistent, I was going to say daily, not daily, consistent basis. Sometimes with our younger commanders, especially on the street, things start to get real busy. and they want to jump in and help because that's natural, and because, just like you said, that's what they were really good at.
Mhm. I know how to do that.
I know how to do that.
Mhm.
And probably did that very, very well. But what that's doing is that's preventing somebody else from growing in that skill. It's preventing somebody else from functioning in the role that they need to. And we've seen at times when they get involved in something that's in the weeds, something else kicks off. And I've just lost my commander that's involved in some simple thing that should be taken care of by a deputy. And if not a deputy, it shouldn't go past a sergeant, but now they're involved in it to the point to where it's difficult to get them out of it to handle something else that's going on in the patrol division. So it is natural for us to find that comfort and go back to that. I like the other thing that you really said, and one of the things that we need to kind of keep on the top of our, or in the front of our mind during these leadership kind of dilemmas, right? All of this noise is out here, and where do I go? In that noise, there's a lot of distractions. It's a lot of different places that we can go. It helps with avoidance of doing the thing that we may think is going to be real tough, that we may not want to do, or the thing that's going to be very time consuming. And we're not going to want to jump into that. We want to come over here because we can get this taken care of real quick. This is simple. I've done this 100 times. It's comfortable. It's simple. Going back to that, we get to check a box.
But it's the opposite is the reality. When leaders step into everything, they slow everything down.
They do.
And they do stall that growth. And they take away opportunities and understanding from their team. They're just where they don't belong, and it's costly.
And I want to go back to that. That effect that it has on the team, we can't lose sight of that, because it will start to erode some trust. It starts to create confusion about roles. And every time that leader takes work back that they should be doing, it prevents that growth from somebody else.
And that misaligned decision doesn't just affect you. It just has a ripple effect throughout your whole team. Keeping things big picture as a leader is truly an act of service to our team. And it helps us stay in our lane. It helps them stay in their lane. When I know that I'm not going to cross over, they know I'm not going to cross over. They can do more effectively what they feel they've been assigned to do. When I delegate something and then I take it back, I'm just saying I don't have the belief in them. I don't think they can do it. But if I delegate it and let them do it, and they're very capable skills, it empowers them. It makes them stronger the next time. It allows them to focus. It allows them to be creative. It allows them to build confidence and esteem. And as a leader, we serve our team best when we choose that prioritization wisely, and we can stay in our lane and stay out of the weeds, and we can lead above the noise.
I want to just expand a little bit on what you just said, because I think it's very important. We do all of those things that you talked about, but that's not what our intent is.
Right.
And that's why this is, it's such a conundrum. It's not what our intention is, but that is what the result ends up being. We're just trying to be a good leader. We're trying to help. We're never trying to make the team feel like we don't trust in what it is that they do. And it really draws me back to two different teams that I was involved in. One would be when I was working on the flight deck. The other would be when I was a member of the SWAT team. Because when you're in those specific roles, you have to be relied upon to do your role, to do your job. If you start to drift from that, it could have catastrophic results. It could lead to somebody getting very seriously hurt or even dying. If I'm even in a leadership role, because I was in a leadership role on the flight deck when I was leading a team that would go in and arm and de-arm the aircraft as they would leave the carrier or they would return to the carrier. If I started to insert myself into somebody else's role, chances were pretty good that we were going to miss a step, or I was going to be in a position that I should not have been in.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I go to a team leader role on a SWAT team, if I go and try to do somebody else's work, I'm no longer watching what all of the team members are doing so that I can make the next best decision as to the information that's coming into us. Thank goodness, most of the time when we're in leadership roles, the consequences are not that dire. But whether they are or they aren't, the thought and the feeling that those team members have, it's the same. Why did that leader move into that role when I was supposed to be doing it? They don't trust me. I'm not qualified. They're a micromanager. All of those questions start to surround that team member when a leader steps in outside of what it is that they're supposed to be doing.
So from the position of chief or sheriff or, whatever, the higher executive leadership teams, what are some of the early warning signs that you can see a leader going through that helps you know that big picture's in jeopardy?
Yeah. There's some very common ones. I would say that when somebody that's working for me constantly has shifting priorities, they may not be focusing where they need to be. They're kind of not getting their role because they're getting into the weeds in different things and they're not leading from that. I don't know where we got it from, but typically in leadership, we talk about different elevations. You're looking at things from the 1,000 foot level or the 40,000 foot level, right? When you start to go down and start to look at things at the 1,000 foot level, your priorities are going to be different there than they are when you should have been at the 30,000 foot level and stay there. That's where you need to be. That's what your role is. You've got folks working for you that should be doing those things. So you're going to see that shifting of priorities. You're going to see unfinished work. You're going to see team confusion, which is huge. If your team is confused somewhere along the lines, there's a leadership problem.
Donald Miller says, if you confuse, you lose.
Yes. Yeah, it's so true. You're also going to see this leader overwhelm. They're going to look really busy. They're going to be very busy. They're going to be burned out. They're going to be stressed out. And they're getting nothing done because they're overwhelmed.
Yeah.
They've lost themselves in the noise.
So if a leader starts feeling that overwhelm, where should they start? Where is it that they can start to correct the situation and start to back away and get back to that 30,000 foot level?
Yeah, I would say a couple of different things. One, hopefully they have the self-awareness to understand that I'm in this a little, a little bit too far. I'm overwhelmed here. I need to take a step back. And that first step back is just taking a pause. It's taking a pause and assessing where we're at, because you can't get on top of it until you take that step back and take a look at everything that's there. And then it's really important that you identify what that next one priority is. And really that's where you start. You communicate it clearly and you take that first step towards action to complete that first priority.
And when we turn this into something practical that our listeners can start to apply right away today, because it's not really, we're not here to help people hear concepts. We're here to help them make changes and be better leaders and develop their leaders better. So how is it that they can start moving out of the weeds, practically speaking?
I will tell you that there are times that I have to remind myself and do that same thing. And it's asking yourself, where am I too involved in work that someone else should be owning, should be doing? That's their role. And if I'm too involved in that, then I need to start backing myself out of that and get the person that should be. So like in my situation, I'm a division chief. I have commanders that report directly to me. If I find myself too involved, then I need to go to one of the commanders who's responsible for this thing that I'm involved in and say, hey, look, bring you up to speed. Here's where we're at. I really need you to move forward with, or have the sergeant move forward with whatever that is. We really have to be honest with ourselves. And that's at times that can be difficult, right? Because we, again, some of those things was our kind of giftedness or our love. We just love working in that area. And those are the things that we would gravitate to, and we'd find it really easy to get pulled into the weeds. And we just have to make sure that when we start stepping into the weeds, that we pause and we start stepping back out of the weeds. We have to make sure that it's covered, but we've got to step out.
And the important point is we don't often get pulled into the weeds. We act like we don't have any control over that.
Right.
But really what's happening is we're stepping into the weeds.
Oh, absolutely.
It's intentional.
It is intentional because, again, it's something that we may love, and we end up stepping in there, and we're stepping too far into it.
So when we have a leader who identifies that task, they know that they need to step back from it. They can delegate it to the right person. Choose carefully.
Right.
Be smart about this. Don't just slide it off your plate onto anybody.
Right.
Choose the right person to do the job. Communicate what success is going to look like, and then also stay out of it. Hands off unless you're truly, truly needed. So instead of asking, what else can I take on? You're starting to ask yourself, where do I need to step back so that I can lead more effectively? It's almost like you have this project that needs to be done. Is this project beneficial to fulfilling the mission that we're out to fulfill? If it's yes, now you ask yourself, do I need to do this, or can I delegate it to someone else? Right. 99 times out of 100, that task is going to be delegated.
Yep.
Especially when you're in a large agency. Smaller agencies, it's a little tighter for sure.
Oh, absolutely.
But
yeah, you're wearing multiple hats in a smaller agency. You're more generalized than specialized. So you have to do a lot more. I look at the smaller police departments or the smaller sheriff's office where you could actually see the police chief or the sheriff out on the street handling a radio call, because there's only 5 people in the entire organization.
Totally a different story.
Totally a different story. But when we're talking in the larger organizations, there are defined specific roles for those leaders, and it's really important for us to stay in our leadership lane.
So the role of a leader is not, again, to do more. It's to position yourself to where you can lead best.
Right.
So stay back where you need to, stay focused on the big picture, and lead above the noise.
This leadership thing, leadership isn't tested when things are calm. And we know that. It's always tested when everything is competing for that leader's attention at the same time. Those are the moments that the instinct is to jump in, to fix, to handle, to take control of whatever is right in front of you. But that's also the moment where we're going to separate the leaders from the managers, really, because managers will manage that task, and that's their role. But we need the leaders. We need to demonstrate that this is what matters most. Because if you stay in the weeds, you might feel productive, and it might feel good. That might be your comfort zone, but you're going to lose the ability to lead because you're down in the weeds. The truth of this is that at some point in your leadership journey, your role changes. When I was a sergeant, it was one thing, commander another thing, captain, chief, sheriff. Every time that role changed, and every time the leadership expectations of my specific role were different.
Mm-hmm.
I'll also tell you that the higher you go, the less of what's happening in the weeds needs to be part of your role or your responsibility. Leave that to those that are there to do that. You're no longer the one that needs to do everything. You are the one that needs to see clearly, to set that direction, and to create the conditions for others to succeed.
And that's not always comfortable, for sure, because stepping into the weeds makes you feel like you're taking a part, like you're helpful, like you're contributing. But when you step out of the weeds, you feel like you're letting go. And what you're really doing is making space for your team to grow and your organization to move forward, to step into fulfilling the calling to which you've been called.
Right. Our strong leaders don't get pulled into everything. They stay focused on where they add the most value. They lead above the noise. And when they do that well, they don't just improve performance. The beautiful thing in all of this is that they then strengthen their people and they move the mission forward. If you stay in the weeds, you might get the work done, but you won't lead the mission. If today's episode added value, don't let it end here.
Share it with someone on your command staff or leadership team, because strong leadership isn't built in isolation.
And if you're ready to develop or become proactive leaders inside your organization,
leaders who communicate clearly and strengthen internal trust,
then visit leleaders.com to learn more about our coaching programs, workshops, and keynotes.
And if the podcast has been helpful, we'd appreciate your 5-star review on Apple Podcasts.
Until next time, lead with clarity, lead with conviction, and elevate your call to service.